All right, everyone. To start off, my name's Lance Watt. I'm a biologist with the Wetland Habitat Review Section in Community Development. And today we're Community Development Learning Lab going over understanding wetland habitat information in MapsOnline. I've been reminded to try to ask that we please hold any questions for the end. We've got a question and answer session, so that way we can keep the presentation moving smoothly. Guess just real quick, MapsOnline is our online GIS or Geographic Information Services tool, which is searchable by parcels, address. It's an amazing resource which has a multitude of different overlays which are possible from many different disciplines. It includes historic aerial imagery, which can be helpful with our wetland habitat reviews. Real quick, kind of start with what our wetland habitat group actually regulates. So first off is going to be priority habitat areas. All of your priority habitat areas are going to be protected per our habitat conservation ordinance. And these areas should be maintained in a natural state. Riparian habitat are those areas which are associated with streams. The riparian ecosystem is the extent of the area alongside a water body that significantly influences the exchange of energy and matter from terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. Riparian ecosystems are a focal point for conservation because they provide many functions for both terrestrial and aquatic environments, including fish, wildlife habitat, habitat connectivity, bank stability for the streams, shade, pollution removal, contributions of nutrients, etc. But for the context of our current habitat ordinance, the habitat type extends outward from whatever the established ordinary high water mark is, from the edge of the stream to the edge of the floodway fringe, or the old 100-year floodplain, or to a specified distance based off the type of stream present. So if it's a non-fish-bearing seasonal stream, it'd be 75 feet. If it was non-fish-bearing perennial, it'd be 100. And it goes up to 200 feet for fish-bearing, 250 feet for a shoreline stream. The stream layers that we have in our GIS utilize the Washington Department of Natural Resources mapping and definitions for classifying our streams. If you'd like to change any of the typing or locations for streams that we have mapped online, it is possible, but you're going to need to contact Washington Department of Natural Resources in coordination with Washington Fish and Wildlife and other agencies and tribes. The second type of priority habitat that we regulate by the conservation ordinance is priority non-riparian habitat and species, which are identified by the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. Non-riparian habitat includes habitat features which may or may not be associated with riparian habitat. The most frequent ones that we run into are going to be Oregon white oak woodlands, biodiversity area and corridor, and priority snags and or logs. Although there are multiple other ones also. The species level includes individual listed species like sandhill crane, Oregon spotted frog, as well as species groups, including wintering waterfowl, cavity nesting ducks, etc. I provided a link to the Washington Fish and Wildlife Priority Habitat Species page. If you're interested in exploring that further, it's got further descriptions and mapping on where these features are actually at and lists by county. So to kind of go further into our ordinance, I'm like, any actual or proposed impacts to a priority habitat area would need to be reviewed by county wetland habitat review staff. Actual impacts are going to include things such as unpermitted clearing, development, violations, proposed impacts, maybe for future building, things like that. As part of that, our review would include a determination which would identify if there's priority habitat on site and then map the actual locations of these features. We then overlay whatever impacts were proposed through a site plan over the priority habitat areas that we have mapped to see if there were actually any impacts. Also, one other thing to note is just our avoidance minimization clause in our habitat ordinance, which states to first try to avoid any impacts to a priority habitat area if that's possible. In the event that it's not possible, then we would need justification for the impact, and you need to demonstrate how any minimization measures have been completed at that point. Minimization and avoidance could be, complete physical avoidance in the case of like riparian habitat. You have an individual oak tree, try to avoid impacting it. It can be temporal type of mitigation or avoidance. Like if you got wintering waterfowl, we're going to ask you to try to do your construction during the summer. Well, the waterfowl aren't using the site. So otherwise, it may include just trying to move locations of a driveway, or maybe we can tweak the location on the house or something like that a little bit, just to try to, instead of having a full impact, we can push it off a little bit. Part of that, I've also included our contacts at the bottom of the slide there. Got our phone number, email. Feel free to reach out to us for any questions on what our habitat ordinance does. Next, I'll try to quickly address wetlands. Again, all wetlands, wetland buffers are protected by the county wetland protection ordinance at the local level. Wetlands are also regulated by the state Washington Department of Ecology and at the federal level by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So if you have any actual proposed wetland and or wetland buffer impacts, please make sure to check in with all regulatory agencies. It's not just the county that's looking at these. As part of looking at wetlands, we utilize the standards in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Wetland Delineation Manual and all the associated supplements that were recently done for establishing wetland boundaries. And essentially, for it to be a wetland, it needs to have 3 criteria to be met. The first of these is going to be having hydric soils or soils present that can hold water if the water happens to be present. The second is going to be some source of hydrology. So this can be a stream overflowing its banks and helping add water to a wetland. It could be in a depression, holding it seasonally. It could be groundwater driven. There's multiple different sources that it could do. And the third thing it needs is having vegetation which can survive being wet for an extended period of time. A lack of any one of these features would mean that it's not a wetland. But to delineate a wetland boundary, we're basically looking at trying to find an area that we know is wetland and an area within 6 feet or so that we know is upland. And basically, the wetland boundary lines could be somewhere in between those 2 points. So as part of doing this, it's on the delineation side, it's looking at wetlands and upland pieces of this. Also recognize wetland delineation is a highly technical skill performed by trained professionals, which involve multiple facets of plant identification, as well as analyzing soils for hydric soil indicators, hydrology indicators, etc. So I can personally attest it is a very highly technical skill. For wetland buffers, they're established dependent on the type of impact which is being proposed and the quality of the wetland which is going to be impacted. The quality of the wetland is identified by using the Washington Department of Ecology's wetland rating system for Western Washington. It's a form which we have to fill out, which we basically have to analyze on-site features, then we have to come back into the office, look at GIS, look at off-site features which are present. It's a qualitative document, i.e. it's like each thing we do creates a score. At the end of the score, we tally everything up, and whatever that final score is tells you what the category of the wetland's going to be. So it goes everywhere from category 1 to category 4, with category 1 being highest quality wetland out there, down to category 4, which is going to be lesser quality. And the second piece of it that in order to figure out what the buffer's going to be. It's just going to be dependent on what the type of development's going to be. For instance, if you had an industrial commercial site, it's going to need a higher, bigger buffer than potentially a smaller residential site on a large lot. So we're looking at both those things in order to get the wetland buffer established. Similar to our habitat ordinance, as far as wetland permitting goes, we also have an avoidance minimization clause in our wetland ordinance, which again says try to avoid impacts to a wetland buffer if you can. If you can't, then you would end up needing to, again, justify the impacts, show how you minimized any impacts, and you'd have to have a wetland permit with applicable mitigation to move forward. Again, I've also got the contacts for our wetland group. We're basically a combined group, but got them at the bottom of the slide here for you. So next, got to dive into getting into MapsOnline. First option is going to be through our wetland habitat review page. In order to get there, got to start from the Clark County webpage, which I put a link at the bottom of the slide there. Once you click on that link, it'll bring you up to the page that we have shown here. What you want to do is click on departments under this orange arrow. And then on the left side over here, highlighted in orange, you'll see it says community development, which is where you want to click. It'll take you over to our community development page. And so once you're in here, you'll see a number of different sections on the side over here for all of community development. Our wetland habitat sections down here towards the bottom. Currently I've expanded it, and you can see it's broken down into 3 sections. You got overview section, which provides general information to our section, including relevant current information pertaining to our program. It's going to also include contact information for us and the permit center. It's going to include anything that has any public comment period on it, including some of our standalone type 2 wetland permits. If there's any SEPA permits that might require, it would also include that. The second one down is forms and fees. Again, it's going to give you a link to all of our forms and fees, and it'll also give you a link to our online LMS system. And the third one down where it says wetland and habitat priority lookup is where we're going to begin. So once you click on there, you're going to be prompted to enter in a property account number or your parcel number. And what you'll need to do is enter that into the box and then click on the CAPTCHA here to say, no, I'm not a robot. And if you're unsure of your property account number, this can be obtained through our Property Information Center. And I've included a link to that down at the bottom here. All right, so for our current example, I'm basically looking at Klein Line Pond, which the address is 112 Northeast 70. Oh, I missed a number. 11112. Northeast 17th Street. There we go. Let me click on search. And it's going to take us to the Property Information Center page. This has a wealth of information on the parcel or address which you're searching for. For instance, if you want a quick glance if there's potential wetland or habitat indicators on the site, you could click on the environmental tab here. I'm going to scroll down a touch. And real quick, it'll show you on the habitat side. Are there habitat species present? Yes. Is it also has waterfowl concentrations, biodiversity area, corridor. On the riparian habitat side, it has map fish habitat, seasonal habitat, stream, or shoreline stream habitat, and it looks like it also has map floodway fringe present. On the wetland side, it does show a potential presence, and it'll also give you a wetland class. Another aside, if you happen to already be inside the Property Information Center page here, you can get to MapsOnline just by clicking this link right here, and it'll automatically jump you over to whatever parcel you already have selected. Something I'm gonna touch on momentarily, but because I'm already here, I also wanted to point out you do have help videos, documents up in the upper right. So once you do get into MapsOnline, it basically helps you navigate how to use our GIS system online. So just please be aware of that. Typically for going to MapsOnline, what I would do is I would just highlight over it whatever the property ID number was, right click it, you can copy, and then it will take you can use that just to copy it into the search box that we were just talking about. So let me reduce here. So real quick, now we'll jump into our actual maps online. All right, so for this one, so we're doing 186546000. And depending on your connection speed, it should get you where you gotta go. You can see if it's working, if it has this loading box up in the top corner. And hopefully this will get there soon. If not, I might be jumping just back to our slides. Come on, internet. All right. Well, apparently we don't have the best connection speed here. Normally it's going to load a touch quicker than that. Apologies for this delay. Let's see if this is going to work, or tell you what, let me try one other. Oh, now it's starting to like us. I think. Okay. All right. Well, normally it would zoom into the parcel that you asked it to jump in on there. Let me try this again here. I said it was parcel 186546000. Boom. Now it likes us. Sorry about that hiccup there. All right, so after you click submit, it'll automatically take you to MapsOnline, such as we got here now. It'll start you off in this search tab. And please note, like I said, it can take a little time, but this search page gives you various links to information, reports that you might need about your subject parcel. Like I said, if you wanted to go back to the Property Information Center, you could. If you want a property fact sheet, which is kind of just a condensed 1-2 page sheet you can print out about your parcel with information from the Property Information Center, you could do that. You go down a little bit more for information, it'll give you the property ID number. If it has a address, whoever happens to own it, in this case it's Clark County Parks, and a physical mailing address. Scroll down, it'll also give you a picture if it's available. And basically, as you can see, it's a very colorful parcel at this time, which means there's a lot of environmental layers present. So what I'm going to do is click on layers over here, and it'll automatically take you to our environmental section, which you can see up here. It's broken down with these lines into various subsections. So for environmental, we have first section's land records, second section is environmental. There's a lot of them, so if you scroll down, the last one's got at the very bottom is transportation. It also gives you the option to change the base map if you want, or if you wanted to look at any of the historic aerial imagery we've got. It starts all the way back 1955 and goes all the way up through 2023. And these were done at varying intervals. They're varying levels of quality, but it's still a valuable resource to be able to look at how things have changed over time. And other thing to point out with this is just the parcel that we're looking at on this map is also highlighted in this light blue color. So now we can move on to our map layers. So scrolling back up to the top here. So like I said, each one of these is broken down into its own sections. What I also want to point out is you've got these gray boxes with the check marks in them. Some of them are checked, some of them are not checked. Whatever is currently checked is what's going to show on the map. If you wanted to turn one of these on and or off, you could do that. For instance, if I click on priority habitat species, you can see that a lot of that color just disappeared, and you can turn them back on again. You can turn them as many layers on and off as you'd like to on there. The other thing I wanted to point out, because we are just looking at wetland habitat here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off floodplain, geology, inner elevation. If you have any, because those are going to be more related to community development engineering programs. If you've got any questions on those features, you want to direct them there. Also for this, I'm going to turn off our shoreline designations, because if you have any shoreline questions, that's going to need to be directed towards our land use group. So again, kind of last thing I wanted to point out here is next to our check boxes, you see these circles that have the letter I next to them. Some of them are kind of grayed out. This one happens to have a black circle around it. If it's got a black circle, that means that's what's going to be chosen with our identify tool. So if we go up to the top, I've got the identify tool already highlighted. So we bring it over, you can see that it has an arrow with the black eye on it, so you know you're on the identify tool. In this case, it's identifying what the tax lot is. So if we were to click on there, take you right back to that search tab where we just were on the property information. If you want to see different property, you can see the address changes, property ID number changes, photo changes. So again, identification is a handy tool to have. The other thing I wanted to point out, just in case you weren't sure exactly what a particular layer might happen to be, like you didn't know what tax lots was, you can see it's highlighted in blue. If you click on that, it's a link. It'll bring you up to what the layer information is, what the metadata is. The metadata is basically just the tables that run in the background that have all the applicable information that's going to be displayed in our GIS resource here. So with that, so we got our search tabs, and what I'm going to do next is go further down our environmental tab here. So next thing we've got is going to be is our, scoot it on down here, First one we have up in our environmental tab was Endangered Species Act. Again, this primarily deals with fish barriers, fish of concern for the state and federal level. Again, as part of this, it does not identify non-fish species that are protected by the state and federal level. So again, with that, you're going to want to contact Fish and Wildlife or the state Fish and Wildlife or National Fish and Wildlife if you've got any questions on if there happen to be eagles present or Columbia deer present or any of the state listed species. So our group, if those layers happen to be present or particular types have to be present, we can also work with those agencies. So right now I'm going to flip that one off because we don't typically deal with fish with our habitat ordinance because our jurisdiction starts at the edge of the ordinary high water mark and goes outward, not the actual stream or lake itself. Next is going to be just our environmental constraints layer. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that one. Basically it's a combined layer. It's a conglomeration of all these different areas. It's a very, very general type of layer. Like I said, it picks up if you've got wetlands potentially present, slopes, shoreline, habitat, floodplain, unstable slopes. It's very broad. But if you do happen to click on that, I mean, it's a good, quick tool to tell you if something's present. But if you want to break down into individual layers, like I said, break it out and then pick one of those individually. But for the sake of this, I'm going to turn environmental constraints off and reduce that. So let's go down to our priority habitat and species. So for this, I am going to turn off our slopes, our soils, and wetlands. And I'm going to turn on our stream and fish habitat layer. And like I was noting previously with our habitat ordinance, it's going to, so priority habitats and species, it's going to have riparian habitat, which is the one type I mentioned that we regulate. The second type was the non-riparian habitat, which is here, and the species layer, which is here. So I'm going to start off with riparian habitat on this one. I'm going to click off these other habitat layers. And what we should end up with, if we look underneath riparian habitat, all of riparian habitat is going to be shown with this kind of green vertical stripe pattern. So on our subject parcel here, let me zoom out. You can see we have riparian habitat mapped over a majority of the site. And as part of this, the distances that are shown for riparian habitat are basically the distances I mentioned earlier, the pre-described distances. So whatever water feature we have, GIS has projected a set distance off of that. So that's what's being represented here. Also note that these distances are going to be changing with the Wetland Habitat Ordinance update that's expected sometime later this year. Instead of being a set distance like it currently is based on stream type, we're going to be looking at whatever the site potential tree height near the stream is based off the soil class present. And we'll have a new GIS layer once that becomes fully active, but just be aware that's coming down the pike. It's like also be aware that the stream layers that are shown are those which we get from Washington Department of Natural Resources. I have the stream fish habitat layer turned on, which shows the typing of the tree streams here. So you can see we have a shoreline stream in the dark blue. We've got fish-bearing stream mapped here. Also to, I guess, point out with this is per our habitat ordinance, we have to go by whatever the actual conditions on the ground are, not what's mapped to GIS. So for instance, we can start with like Klein Line Ponds over here. Right now it's showing this blue line is a stream right in the middle of it. However, this light blue area is going to be the outline of the pond itself. So that would likely be the area where the riparian habitat is going to be projected off of, which you can see by the lines here. Also note that sometimes, even in our own data set here, sometimes there can be differences. For instance, we show this shoreline stream in dark blue coming up and down around here. However, our light blue layer shows a stream potentially coming in down on that bottom part. And situations like that, we turn on the imagery. So it does look like this kind of dark area is going to be Salmon Creek. So it looks like that light blue area probably actually is a stream, but there's also, looks like an old oxbow where part of the stream gets cut off seasonally, which does go up and around over here. So in this particular instance, both of them will probably be regulated. Another thing to point out here is there also may end up being unmapped features, particularly with streams, something we run into. I'm gonna jump back up here, find my elevation tab, turn on contours. We're gonna zoom into this top corner. I'm gonna give it a second to load again. Basically, all these brown lines that you see are topographic lines. In this case, it's on a 2-foot interval, but it helps you see what the topography of the site is. And something that we would be looking for the potential for unmapped streams is going to be these kind of really tight groupings on the topographic lines where they start to form a U or a V shape like you've got here. And also there, and it kind of branches off in 2 directions. So what that signifies in our eyes is looking at it as like you may have an unmapped stream there, because that's going to be a valley in the side of the hillside where it's cut out and has the potential to potentially have a stream channel. So, but ultimately, the only way to figure out if that feature is actually there is you're going to need to consult with one of the county wetland habitat review biologists to do a habitat determination to formally assess the location and typing of any streams, mapped or unmapped, and their respective priority riparian habitat areas. And again, just noting, it's like we have to go by what the actual conditions are on the ground. So if there are unmapped stream present, then that's what's going to be regulated on our side. So, but MapsOnline gives you, again, just a valuable resource just for desktop level review like this. Second, I can turn off our topo line here.
You like physically go down into that area, or you just actually go to the top and then look down? Or do you have some like floating stick? What do you, how do you?
If we can get access, we're gonna try to use what access we have and actually take a GPS point at it. If it's too steep, then we're gonna have to use the best available science that we can. And it may be trying to look at it from the top, maybe trying to look at it from the bottom. Just kind of depends.
No special binoculars?
Oh, so, all right, so next I'm gonna just real quick click on our species layer, and I'm gonna turn on our information box for this one. So again, you'll see species area, it's gonna be this kind of brown-orange crosshatch pattern, has an adjacent to species area, which is 300 feet. Please note the species area that we have shown, we do get from the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. They're mapping these features more at a landscape scale, so sometimes some of their mapping may be off, but That's part of the reason there is this adjacent to next to it, so it helps almost like a catch-all for us, but helps us be able to say, okay, if this, so let's click on this. Right now it's saying we've got information, it's waterfowl concentrations. So we have overwintering waterfowl that we know we're going to use this mapped area. We know that waterfowl like to have places to rest on water. But if you notice this kind of brown area out here, kind of goes over Kleinline Pond. So that'd be kind of a clue for us as staff to talk to Fish and Wildlife and say, okay, does Kleinline Pond also meet this criteria? So just because it's mapped here doesn't mean that it wouldn't still apply here. So just kind of quick point that one out. Next one, I've also got but again, the only way to really figure that out is going to be through a habitat predetermination. So again, coordinate with county wetland habitat staff if you have any questions, and we'll work with Fish and Wildlife and get a map on what's actually there. So I'm going to turn off species. We'll jump into habitat. We'll turn on the information button here. Again, we got this blue hatch area, which is mapped as priority non-riparian habitat, which in this case is the biodiversity area corridor that was mentioned on the property information page. Again, this is going to be more of a mature forest that typically occurs along fish-bearing streams, shoreline streams. They've got particularly important to various species, fish, wildlife. They're biologically diverse over a landscape scale, and they're vertically and horizontally diverse and support a diverse community of species. And so with this one, like I said, if we were to jump back, kind of got that catch-all on that one too. It's only 100 feet for this instance. Well, like I said, it was forested. So if we were to jump in a little bit more, so maybe this area of forest underneath here would probably get picked up. Again, we have to go by what's on the ground, not just what's mapped, but and if we have any questions, we'll coordinate that with Fish and Wildlife also. So I guess, again, just the big thing to point out with priority riparian, non-riparian habitat, MapsOnline, is it's approximate, it's not static, although it's a good starting point, like I mentioned, for the layers which we have. Not all habitat types and species are mapped. A lack of map indicators does not mean that a particular habitat type is not present. There may be unmapped features, like we noted, which may be present, or features which are mapped may extend out farther than where they're shown. So again, you'll want to coordinate with county wetland habitat review staff to do a determination to get a formal call on what habitat types are actually present. And they're good for a period of 3 years. There is a fee associated with it. I've given a link on how to get to our predetermination page. And if you got any questions, reach out to staff. We'll help you try to get everything set up. Next, I'm going to try to quickly switch gears here. Let me turn off our imagery. I'm going to turn off streams. And I'm going to turn off and reduce our priority habitat. And I'll open up and turn on our soils and wetland inventory group. So, got to go back to the beginning of the presentation. One of the first things we said for it to be a wetland is the potential for hydric soils, which is one of the types that we do have here. So if I expand this, you can see hydric soils are going to be mapped with these little purple dots. So the parcel we were looking at did not have hydric soils on it, but if you do look kind of northeast over here by I-5, you can see there is a section with purple dots with mapped hydric soils up there. Similar And I guess the other thing to note there, the hydric soil layer we do have, we get from the USDA or Department of Agriculture, their natural resources section. So that's how we get that hydric soil mapping. Similar to the streams, it's like just because hydric soils are not mapped on a property doesn't mean that they might not occur. If you've got a water body present, then there's a good chance you probably got some hydric soils present. So next thing I'm gonna jump into here is just our potential wetland presence layer, which again, it's going to be a kind of conglomerate layer. It's going to include everything with our permitted wetlands, natural wetland inventory, and our modeled wetlands. So for our particular parcel that we were looking at here, there is some potential wetland presence shown. So what I want to kind of break into next is our permitted wetlands. So there's going to be wetlands that county staff have actually been to, or it could potentially be an off-site portion of a wetland that we had been to previously. Again, this is shown with a darker green color in this instance. Our permitted wetland. Click on information on it. You can see we actually have a wetland case here from 2009, and it was shown as a Category 3 wetland. Again, for 2009, it's going to be expired for the purposes of our wetland ordinance, but it'll be a good starting point for us to go make sure we took a look at that area again with any future determination. Jump into our next layer. I'm going to turn on NWI, which is our National Wetland Inventory layer. This is a layer that the federal government did back in the 80s. They essentially had old aerial images, and they kind of sketched with a Sharpie over where they thought wetland areas were. They're really good at picking up streams and ponds. Some of the other areas in between are a little lacking, but again, it's still a good starting point for us. If it is shown on a area, then it is going to kind of be a flag for wetland staff to take a closer look at it. The other thing I wanted to point out was our modeled wetland layer, which is a GIS study the county ran back in the 2000s. It basically looked at wetland classes based on their hydrogeomorphic type. So if they were associated with lakes, if they were, slope or hillside seeps, if they were depressional wetlands, if they were associated with rivers like this one particularly is. Again, it's a modeled wetland. Just because it's shown does not mean that there actually is a wetland there. But again, it's another flag for us to go take a closer look. And like I said, it's similar to the habitat ordinance. Having a permitted or lack of having a permitted wetland mapped on there does not preclude the possibility that there is an actual unmapped wetland on site. That said, there's some potential wetland indicators that we can look at through historic aerial imagery. I'm gonna try to just real quick find parcel. I'm gonna jump further west in the Salmon Creek Greenway here, 1873940. And I'm gonna zoom in down over here. And we've got our layers up. And what I want to do is turn the model layers off. Real quick, kind of point to a couple of layers that we've got. So real quick, let's start with our most recent one. You can see where the stream is up at the northern end here. You can see there's a trail that cuts through. You can see where the trees and different vegetation are. We've got 2 layers that are particularly helpful for our wetland review for aerial images. The first is going to be our 2002 April infrared, which will hopefully load. That one did not. There we go. All right, so the areas which show up dark are going to be areas that have water or potentially saturated. So here you can see you've got potential water here, here, here on the parcel, also offsite over here. This darker area here is just going to be shadows coming off the trees. You can kind of tell by the jagged portion on it. Other one that's valuable is our 2012 aerial, which is a color aerial, which was done in spring of 2012. And again, it also gives you these dark areas. But here you can see, compared to where it was in 2002, this whole area gets a lot wetter. Looks like there may also be a connection in through here. So, again, it's going to be, I guess to kind of reiterate, the mapping that we have for potential wetland presence in MapsOnline is approximate. It's not fully definitive, although it's a very good starting point for those features and layers that we have. As kind of noted here, I'm like, not every wetland is going to be mapped, and a lack of wetland mapped indicators does not mean that wetlands are not present. These, so like I said, if county staff end up seeing that you've got any of the mapped wetland layers on a parcel, or we can look at the imagery and see what looks like it might potentially be a wetland, then it's going to be a flag for us that we need to go do a closer look. We need to do a wetland determination and actually have boots on the ground to figure out what's actually there. Only other thing to point out is, as far as our wetland ordinance goes, it's going to regulate all the wetlands. So if you happen to have a wetland that's off-site and we might not have access to it, we're going to have to try to use the best available science that we can to try to say where that wetland's at if we cannot get access to it. And it may have a wetland buffer which extends onto your parcel. So just please be aware of that also. And like I said, I've tried to give a link to our predetermination on there also. And like I said, the only way to really figure that out is going to be talking with county wetland staff, as well as getting out there doing a determination. Also, just one thing I really want to kind of highlight on that is our determinations are not full-blown delineations, so just please be aware of that. But with that, I will nope. Let me just jump back. I'm gonna end it there. Thank everyone for coming. Feel free to reach out to our group with any comments, questions. I've got our contact info there, and I guess open it up if anyone's got questions.
If you're asking a question, please push the button on your microphone, and when it turns green, it is on.
I'm not clear of the difference between the habitat and wetlands. You use them somewhat interchangeably. The habitat had a stream, but the wetlands is wet.
Okay, so the habitat, we've got a couple different habitat types that we look at. The first one's going to be our stream riparian habitat, and the second type's going to be other types that are identified from Washington Fish and Wildlife, which are going to include our non-riparian habitats like biodiversity areas, priority snags, and Oregon white oak woodlands, things like that. That areas that they have specific definitions for, and they have mapping for some of it. But so, and basically anything that I guess defined by Fish and Wildlife as priority habitat would be regulated by our habitat ordinance. as opposed to wetlands, which can sometimes occur with streams. There are riparian or I guess riverine wetland systems. There are slopes that have a seep that feed into a stream. But wetlands are going to be, I guess, a completely different side. They're their own entity outside of habitat. So it's going to be basically wet areas in the soil. They're going to have to, I guess like I mentioned earlier, they've got soils which can hold water. They need a source of water and plants that can grow in it. And these areas are also protected separately through our wetland ordinance versus our habitat ordinance. And like I said, they can occur within habitat areas or they can also occur outside of them. So I'm not sure if that helped answer part of that but they are two completely different, I guess, regulated entities, because any of the habitat types are going to be regulated by the county and potentially also through by Washington Fish and Wildlife or U.S. Fish and Wildlife, depending on the species present, versus wetlands would be regulated by the county, but they're also regulated by the State Department of Ecology and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So we have different regulatory agencies that we work with for habitat versus with wetlands.
How about those artificial drainage things that lots of communities have? They end up becoming wetlands too then, do they not?
If it's artificially created,
Like
then-
stormwater facilities? Yes? Yes.
Yeah. So if it's artificially created, then no, it's not going to be regulated as a wetland per se. So again, we'd have to be able to go out to the site, be able to verify that it was actually artificially created. We frequently, especially with wetlands, end up running into, you've got ditches at the edge of the property or something, and trying to figure out, is the ditch a regulated wetland? And at that point, we're looking at not just the area within the ditch, but also outside of it. Because if the ditch is in an upland area, then it's considered upland. But if the ditch itself is within a wetland, then that part of the ditch is regulated as the wetland. So, but generally speaking, artificially created wetlands aren't going to be regulated. Although I guess there have been some artificial mitigation that we've done for habitat. For instance, we've had people put up bird boxes or things like that, which we would still include as part of their habitat feature at that point, but as part of their mitigation. But generally speaking, yeah, stormwater ponds, things like that aren't going to be regulated by our group.
So you alluded to a new wetland manual or a guidance coming out. Does that preclude the 87 Corps of Engineers manual that's been in and out of jurisdiction, shall we say, for probably since 1987? Is there some additional or new guidance coming out this fall?
On the
How to
wetland
define
side?
a regulatory or regulated wetland?
On the wetland side, so yeah, we've got the 87 core manual that we primarily use, and we've also got the supplemental that we have to use, which I think was done back in the 2010s maybe, and they've got one for the Northwest region that we follow. There hasn't been a whole lot of new guidance per se from the federal level. Most of our guidance has been coming from the state level, Department of Ecology, and they've had some changes to, I guess, what the wetland buffers are per se. But generally our wetland ordinance that we've got with the county, at least as I understand it, generally follows more of the state model and basically what the state has told the county that we have to do. For instance, I know with Sackett, which was a federal land case that went up to Supreme Court. There are some areas that the Corps of Engineers may not regulate as a wetland, but county and state would still regulate it as a wetland. So, but as far as additional guidance, the last guidance I remember from ecology was, I want to say the last year. Yeah, the only other thing we've got really coming out, I guess, is just our combined wetland habitat ordinances are basically going to be combined into one. And I don't know that too much is changing on the wetland side, but on the habitat side, like she had mentioned, it's like our distances are going to change. Instead of being a set distance, it'll be site potential tree height. But ultimately, for trying to figure out if we've got wetland habitat on the ground, we really need to get someone just to actually look at the site and get eyes on it. We've got GPS, which will get us, a lot of cases, sub-meter accuracy of where we have to be, and we can map where these locations are and provide a map and say, okay, this is where things really are. These are the areas we suggest to avoid if you can. And if you can't, then we'll try to help work through the process as we can. You just may need a wetland habitat permit, depending.
I have a question. So I work in Parks and Lands, and we have a property that we haven't made it through land use yet, or haven't applied for land use yet, but the wetland layer showed that there was wetland on the property, and we had a wetland delineation report completed and found that there is no wetland. And we have another property where it looks like the layer is also likely inaccurate, and I'm not a highly technically skilled wetland person, but I'm just wondering, when you go through land use, does that layer get updated, or is there ever work to improve the accuracy of the layer? Because there's, financial implications for that work, and so I was just curious.
Good question. I guess the layer that we primarily update is going to be our permitted wetland layer, because that's one that we have more direct control over. Like I said, our potential wetland layer is kind of a combined layer. Like, it's got National Wetland Inventory mapping on it, but that data is controlled by the federal government, and our GIS team pulls in whatever data they've got on their website periodically and updates based on that. But it's otherwise.
So I can elaborate on that a little more, because when we do look at a site, so when you come through our process, we have the ability to create a mask that when the National Wetland Inventory and the county model are brought into that potential wetland presence layer that you see in MapsOnline, that the mask will actually overwrite the data. And so when we've been to a site, we actually map what is in those inventories, and we know have verified is not wetland, so that the potential wetland presence layer does update, but we do not edit those other data layers. The National Wetland Inventory was adopted by the council in 2005. It would take council action to formally change that. It was done with a grant with the Department of Ecology, and we would have to go back to them to change that layer as well. It is just a GIS model, and the underlying data hasn't changed. But we do try to use what we know and leverage that in the general layer that's available.
So I have a question added on to that, though. So let's say they had two parcels next to each other. One of them says they got it done, and it says it doesn't have a wetland on it. So then, do we ever assume that the parcel next to it then probably doesn't either?
Not without going on the ground
Not
for
without.
verifying it, so.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we have time for one last question, if anyone has any further questions. All righty, well, that concludes our Learning Lab session for April.
Good job, Lance.